Let's configure some trunk ports. So we'll open up PuTTY. I already have my rollover cable connected to the console port of my 2950 switch. Press enter. I've already put the base configuration on this switch. However, there are no VLANs currently configured. So we'll move into privileged mode, and I'll do the show VLAN command to find out what's currently configured. And right now we just have the default VLAN configured. Just VLAN 1 is the only one that's set up on this device, so it's in the default state. Okay, let's move into config mode. And now we're going to create our two VLANs. We need to create VLAN 10. That was for our clients. So we'll give it a name of clients. And then we're going to create VLAN 20. And VLAN 20 will be our web servers. Okay? Once I've created my VLANs, now I can assign them to interfaces. So I can assign them to my switch ports. So I said on VLAN interface 1, int f0/1, I want that to be part of VLAN 10. So I say switch port access VLAN 10. Excellent. I want int f0/2. I need that to be on VLAN 20. So I type switch port access VLAN 20. And now I need to configure my trunk port. So the trunk port I have configured on interface fast Ethernet 0/24. When I set up the trunk, I want to force it into trunk mode. So I really have two modes that my switch port can operate in with respect to VLANs. I can have a switch port that is an access port. I can have a switch port that is a trunk port. And then I can have the port be auto-negotiated. And by default, the Cisco ports come auto-negotiated. I am not a fan of auto-negotiating ports, and I'll explain that more later when we go into the switch configuration video for practical purposes. All right, so I have a separate video where we actually go in and learn how to configure the VLANs properly and abandon VLAN 1. We understand what some other features of the .1q trunking protocol are as well that we need to take into accommodation. Right now, however, I just want to show you how to set up a trunk, and we can go dive into the nitty-gritty details of it later. All right, so the first thing we need to do is we need to force fast Ethernet 0/24 as a trunk port. So to do that, we say switch port mode trunk. Okay, and now fast Ethernet 0/24 is only a trunk port. It can never negotiate anything else but a trunk port. Next, I need to specify which VLANs are allowed to traverse that trunk port. So to do that, I say switch port trunk allowed VLAN. And now I can say 10, 20. So I want to add VLANs 10 and 20. So switch port trunk allowed VLAN, and then you list the VLANs that you want to use there. You can use a range of VLANs if you want, so you could say 10-20, which would allow all the VLANs from 10 through 20 onto that trunk port. Now we haven't created VLANs 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18, and 19. Those are not created, so those actually will not participate in the trunk port. However, if you said switch port VLAN, switch port trunk allowed VLAN 10 through 20, that would allow all the VLANs from 10 through 20. If we do 10, 20, it only allows VLANs 10 and 20. Okay? So once we have our trunk port configured like this, now we can move on to the other switch. Before we do that, let's do a show VLAN to find out if it was configured properly, and we do have VLAN 10, the client's VLAN assigned to port F0/1, and port 20, the web server's VLAN assigned to F0/2. That's great. Let's do show trunk. Ooh, that doesn't work. Show VLAN trunk. That doesn't work either. Let's get the right command here. Be show interface, maybe. Show interface trunk. And there's currently no trunks on this particular switch. Why is that? Well, I have to configure the trunk port on both ends of the link. And actually, now that I'm looking at my switch, I see that my cable is actually disconnected from F024 on the 3560 switch. So let me plug that in, and that will bring up the interface F024, which we can see on the screen now. Change state to up there. Let's do show interface trunk again. And now, since my interface is up and active now I can see F024 is a trunk port. It is currently on. The encapsulation method is 802.1q. The native VLAN is 1. And we're going to talk about this native VLAN in a future video when I show you how to configure a switch for multi-VLAN use in a business setting. All right. Here it's telling me which VLANs are allowed on that trunk port and which ones are active on the trunk port. Okay, so I have VLANs 10 and 20 configured properly here. Let's now move to the other switch, to the 3560. Let me switch my rollover cable. So I'm connected now to the 3560 switch. And we'll see the prompt change here. I labeled this switch as this TS2950 was the previous one. This one we'll call the TS3560. So we'll move into privilege mode here. We'll do show VLAN, see what's currently configured. And nothing is currently configured. We just have the default VLANs. So let's go create our 2 extra VLANs, VLAN 10, which was clients. Ooh, we have to just say name clients. And then VLAN 20, which we're going to name web server. Okay. We can then assign those to interface fast Ethernet 01 by using the switch port access VLAN 10 command. And then INTF0/2, we're going to use the switch port access VLAN 20. Oh, put too many C's in access. There we go. Okay, so now we can go, exist. I'm getting philosophical in my configurations here. So now we can go over and configure our trunk port on the 3560. So our trunk port is F0/24. And what we'll do here is we say switch port trunk encapsulation. And here we have to say either .1q, ISL, or negotiate. Well, whenever we force a port into trunk mode versus the automatic negotiate the switch port, whenever we force it into trunk mode, we have to specify the encapsulation first. Okay? So if I say switch port trunk or switch port mode trunk, I'm going to get an error here. And it's going to say, hey, I can't make it a trunk port unless you tell me what encapsulation to be used. So it says command rejected. An interface whose trunk encapsulation is auto cannot be configured to trunk. So what we have to do here is we have to specify which encapsulation we're using. So we'll say switch port trunk encapsulation .1q. So that'll be the 802.1q trunk encapsulation protocol. Now we can issue the command, not shutdown, switch port mode trunk. And now that will force our port to be a trunk port. The next thing we have to do is we have to tell it which VLANs to allow onto this trunk port. To do that, we're going to use the switch port trunk allowed VLANs command. And here we're going to do 10 and 20. Well, let's say for a moment that I accidentally just add VLAN 10 to my trunk port. Okay? And I do a show interface trunk to see this. So when I do show interface trunk, oh, well, look at that. No wonder why this is so unusual here. So what interface am I configuring? This is why we use our show commands, actually. So what I'm looking at here, and when I issued the show interface trunk command here, what I noticed immediately was that VLANs 1, 10, and 20 are allowed in the trunk port and VLANs, and they're active. VLANs 1, 10, and 20. Well, that's not really what I want. Here it says VLANs 1 through 4094 are allowed in the trunk. Well, holy mackerel, that's exactly not what I want. Well, here, if I look at which switch port I configured, I have to scroll up a bit here, but I'm configuring interface fast Ethernet 0/24. If I look at when I did the show interface command, my trunk port is F0/23. So what happened is my switch automatically negotiated all of the configuration parameters to set up that trunk port. Well, you might ask then, Ross, why are you teaching me how to set up trunk ports if all you have to do is plug the cable in and it automatically figures it out? Well, as a network engineer, you never want to set up your equipment in an auto state unless you know exactly the behavior that's going to occur in that automatic configuration state. If you cannot predict exactly what's going to happen at any given moment in time on your network, during a failure, during adding a device, during anything like that, if you can't predict what's going to happen based on the automatic configuration as it's currently set up, you should disable the automatic configuration and you should do it manually. And in data networking, in my experience, it's way more effective and efficient to do this, to set up networking where the administrator has control over all of the systems as much as they can, where they've granularly configured each portion of that system. That's a way better setup than one where you let the device figure it out for you. In this case, when we let this automatically set up, I didn't even tell it what VLANs to allow. It allowed all of them. Well, all of the VLANs is an unacceptable number of VLANs to put on a trunk port. We never want to trunk all of the VLANs. What will happen is we essentially are expanding our broadcast domain to any VLAN that we connect to the device. And that's exactly not what we want. So let's fix this. So first thing that I need to do is move the cable from F023 to port F024. Physical layer problem. And let me tell you, physical layer problems happen all the time. So now we see fast Ethernet 0/24 change state to up. Let's issue my do show trunk command again. Or show interface trunk, right? Do show interface trunk. Now remember, the do command here escapes us back to privileged mode to issue this one command and then brings us right back to the configure prompt. So we do show interfaces. Now it looks a whole lot better, doesn't it? This, at least to me, it looks a whole lot better. I configured fast Ethernet 0/24 to have .1Q encapsulation. I configured VLAN 10 to be the only VLAN allowed in the trunk. And now VLAN 10 shows up as the only active VLAN on that trunk. So this is a much more attractive setup for configuring VLANs. We always want to make sure our trunk ports are manually configured because then we get the most granular control over which VLANs are propagating through our network. Okay, but the problem is now that we only have VLAN 10 allowed on the trunk. So what we have to do then is allow VLAN 20. So if I issue the command switch port trunk allowed VLAN, and then I put 20 in and press enter, ideally I'd think, oh, that allows VLAN 20. Well, if I show my interface trunk again, it didn't actually add it. It changed it. So it changed my configuration to be for VLAN 10 only. It changed it to be for VLAN 20 only. Now, I guarantee you at some point in your career, this command is going to burn you really, 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 really bad. Every network engineer I've known has been burned by this command over and over and over again. And it's because, let's say that we're working with a trunk port that's alive in a production environment, and we have 100 VLANs going across that trunk. And we come in and we need to add one more VLAN to it. So we issue the command switch port trunk allowed VLAN 20 to add one VLAN to it. And what ends up happening is you end up erasing all 100 VLANs that are going across that trunk and eliminating them and only putting VLAN 20 on it, which usually cuts off all of your traffic to that switch that you're trying to configure. So it's called cutting your arm off. If you don't understand it yet, you will someday as a network engineer, I guarantee it. I've done it 100 times. Not 100 times. I've probably done it one time in my life where I've cut my arm off and I've had to drive, 20 miles to a site to fix a switch that had made a mistake with just one command. So how do we fix it? Well, we use the command switch port trunk allowed VLAN add. We have to put that add command in here. And then we can say add, in this case, VLAN 10, because 20 is already on there. If I now do my show interface trunk, now I can see that VLANs 10 and 20 are on that trunk link. Okay? This last one about VLANs in spanning tree forwarding state and not pruned, we'll cover this in ICND 2. We're going to have a separate section where we just talk about spanning tree, because spanning tree is a relatively sophisticated system that we use to prevent loops at layer 2. And we're going to cover that in more detail later. For the time being, we're going to use this as the opportunity to show you if your trunk port is configured properly. So we have our trunk ports configured on both ends. I have my PCs already hooked up to both of these devices and the servers. Since I don't have access to the web servers directly, we're going to just try pinging across our trunk link to our other workstation. That other workstation has an IP address of 192.168.10.20. So I'll ping that, and sure enough, I get a response. What this means is that my trunk link is configured properly, and I can pass traffic over that trunk link between my two switches. This wraps up our lesson in configuring and understanding VLAN trunks. I hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing you in future Train Signal videos. Thanks.